So, Jessica, just to start off, we'd love to know more about your overall journey into the wind industry, kind of like from undergraduate school to now. What did that path look like, and how did you sort of like what interested you in wind in the first place?
Yeah, totally. It's a bit of a story, so get ready. So I fell in love with just the renewable energy space when I was in high school. I took an environmental science class and thought that all of the technologies were really interesting and I wanted to learn more. Um, but I didn't have any experience in engineering, but I really liked math and science. So I was like, I need to figure out how to get into this industry with the background that I have, and just see where it takes me. So I ended up really focusing in on wind when I did my college tours. Um, so I graduated from a college called SUNY Canton. So part of the State University of New York system is about the furthest away from CUNY as it could possibly be. So it's definitely quite the hike, but basically they had a renewable energy engineering program at SUNY Canton, which they no longer have. But that drew me to the college. And actually, on the drive to the college, I went by a wind farm in Lowville, New York, which is kind of around the Watertown area, if you will. And it's New York State's largest wind farm onshore at this point, so by volume of turbines. And I mean, the field was massive of turbines, and I was like, wow, this is mesmerizing. I'm very excited, really wanted to get into it. So I decided to go to SUNY Canton, and I was in the renewable energy major, which was kind of a combination of like business and engineering, but it wasn't really an accredited engineering program. And knowing that I really liked the math and science, I ended up switching to mechanical engineering my second year, maybe like my fourth semester type timing. And ultimately, I decided on that because I wanted to be able to do more in the industry, if just from an engineering perspective specifically. Like I didn't necessarily want to do the business side, and I really wanted the technical more or less. So once I switched to mechanical, I wanted to make sure that I had internships that tied into the wind industry and try to figure out where I thought I fit in the industry because I really didn't know. I did a lot of self study on wind energy as a whole. I visited a ton of wind farms in upstate New York. Just driving through them, seeing what they're all about, trying to understand what's there and why. I went to landowner meetings for new wind farms. I did all the whatever public activities I could do to be involved in wind. I did, and then ultimately I found an opportunity abroad in Peru with the Wind Aid Institute, and they manufacture and install small scale wind for Peruvian rural communities that don't have access to electricity. So I flew to Peru in my winter semester junior year, I think is when it was. I spent 4 weeks manufacturing and installing small scale wind turbines. We literally turned the lights on for people on our fourth week. Like they had never had lights in their house. They could never, charge their cell phone to call the market that has, the setup if they wanted to sell their livestock or their produce, things like that. So to see everyone's face and just in the purest form of joy to have electricity, I was just sold that wind was what I wanted to do. Um, that internship is it's still operational. Wind Aid's a nonprofit down in Peru. Anyone could go. I would highly recommend if you're interested in hands-on wind, you go take a look at that program. I got funding from my college to help support getting down there, doing the work, etc., which was really beneficial for me because I didn't have any funding at the time. So that was useful. But that kicked off my career in wind. I joined around that time. I joined an organization called at the time it was Women of Wind Energy. Now it's the Women of Renewable Industries and Sustainable Energy organization. It's called RISE. And I ended up being awarded a fellowship through RISE that took me to the American Clean Power Conference, which at the time was specifically focused on wind power. So I could learn about all the companies. I could learn about the key players. I met a lot of people in the industry, sat through educational sessions, things like that, which was a really great opportunity. So anyone who might qualify for that, please take a look for that. And I can send that to this team when it actually goes live for applications. But Yeah, so I was able to do that and then really had to figure out again, where did I want to go from, did I want to go into research? Did I want to go into industry once I graduated? And so the summer of my junior year, I took a research experience for undergraduates through the National Science Foundation, actually. It's an REU if you haven't heard of it. There's, I don't know, dozens across the US where they are hiring students to do research with graduate students and their advisors. And so I joined UMass Amherst in, again, my junior year summer, so just before I was a senior, and ended up doing a desalination project for an offshore turbine. So instead of having a traditional electricity generating turbine, we had a hydraulic turbine that still was operated by the force of the wind that would pump high and low pressure seawater through the system and into a desalination reverse osmosis system or maybe compressed air energy storage with the goal of having on demand fresh water or on demand electricity from this turbine. I learned in that internship that I hated MATLAB and that I never wanted to do it again. um, so that was my personal preference. But from that perspective, um, I decided that research wasn't exactly where I wanted to end up long term, but I enjoyed it, but not in the coding perspective. So then I went back to school, started applying to jobs. I probably applied to 40 or 50 professional full time jobs between November and April, trying to look for a role to figure out what I wanted to do in the industry. Still really didn't know, but I wanted to do something that was hands on, something technical, and I was willing to relocate wherever I needed to go. Basically, I was not having incredible luck finding a full time role. So I started looking at internships again. And I ended up doing an internship with EDP Renewables as a wind turbine technician for the summer after I graduated. So I was able to climb wind turbines, do operations and maintenance, troubleshooting, see major component exchanges, and just get in the field and understand what the technicians are doing in a wind turbine day in, day out, so that when I become an engineer in a position to maybe make some changes and help them better, I could actually do that. So, really trying to find and come from a place of empathy as an engineer to understand what the boots on the ground people were doing. And that's taken my career in many different directions since, which is awesome. So, if you're a senior and you're graduating and you're trying to figure out what you might want to do, an internship after you graduate is totally acceptable. And it gives you an opportunity to maybe get your foot in the door with the company. Because at the end of my internship, I was offered a full time job. However, when I accepted my internship, I didn't stop looking for full time jobs. So I continued to look for opportunities, and I ended up committing to an opportunity at Clemson University as a staff research engineer, believe it or not, research, doing wind turbine operations and maintenance at their wind turbine drivetrain testing facility in Charleston, South Carolina. So that's a Department of Energy funded drivetrain test facility. So we had two types of wind turbines up to a 15 megawatt capacity that we were testing for basically the life of the turbine. So we put an entire turbine through its 25-year life cycle in a 1 year period of testing. So that was anything from maintenance to troubleshooting to test bench operations to reporting to outreach events in the community. It was a big variety. And I did that for about a year and a half, a little bit more than a year and a half. And then I decided I wanted to move back to New York. I'm originally from Buffalo. I had, contacts in Canton. I wanted to be closer to home. And I ended up finding a role with GE Renewable Energy as a wind turbine repair development engineer for up tower repairs. Basically, think of, if you have your car, everyone knows kind of what their car looks like. Let's say if you popped one tire on your car and the manufacturer didn't have the same type of tire, you'd have to replace all four, right? My goal was to say, in a scenario where we have different tire manufacturers and we only want to replace the one, why can we not just replace the one? Let's figure out how to do just one tire instead of have to replace all of the things that are still operational. They just happen to be a little bit different than what we might put in new. So I did that for mostly gearboxes in wind turbines, and then also some main shaft, main bearings, and did it as a craneless application. So how do we prevent having to bring in a really expensive crane and still be able to perform a repair up tower kind of with our hands with additional like smaller cranes up tower with equipment hanging from the roof in the nacelle, things like that. And then just this past March, so almost a year now, I've been with RWE Clean Energy as a technical services engineer, working on the reliability engineering side and supporting all of the day in and day out needs of wind turbine technician and site operations. So I could be doing anything from a maintenance plan to troubleshooting to failure analysis to technical due diligence. If we want to put in a brand new wind turbine and somebody needs to figure out, is it useful or not? Is it going to work? How do we feel about certain components? They might come and ask me that. So I've had a lot of variety. I think that the reality of my background is that it's been very hands-on, which is really exciting because that's the type of stuff that I love. But my goal and my passion at this point is I really like to interact with the operational side of the turbines. When I was at GE, it was a little bit more of the design side, which I enjoyed, but I like the application of engineering and using my engineering background and engineering judgment to make decisions on how to better operate our assets. So that was a lot. I'll stop there. Sure, there might be questions or comments, so feel free to keep firing away.
Yeah, thank you. That's so great to see that you had so many different experiences before your current position and seeing like how the variety of yeah, like exploring different roles kind of led you there. So
Mhm.
I was wondering if you could elaborate a bit more on how those different experiences like contributed to your current role now, like even having background in both academia and industry and even like a little knowledge of business, how do you think that like better prepared you for what you do on the day-to-day now?
Yeah, absolutely. So the academia was really interesting because, the goal there was it was all about the data, right? And when I was at GE, the goal was it's all about the design and the cost savings. So you kind of had this nexus in this role between let's utilize the data to help figure out the cost savings. So that's at least one kind of parallel to where I am between the two opportunities. Um, when I was at Clemson, I did a little bit more of like let's say the business side, and that was more the how do we have strategic partnerships? How do we go to conferences and present research? How do we, engage with industry, being academia, to actually be putting out research that was worthwhile to the industry? And as someone in industry, as an operator of wind farms, solar farms, et cetera, we look to the research entities to help us get data again to make our decisions. So, what I like to say a lot is that most of the decisions we're making are data driven decisions. And that really is where kind of like your engineering judgment comes from. And so for me, kind of progressing into the different roles, right? The opportunity at Clemson is a little further from home, but I really enjoyed what I was doing. The academia was a little weird because I was like, I didn't think I really wanted to do research, right? But I wasn't doing MATLAB. I was doing still the traditional industrial role without having as much of the day to day. I'm just going to sit down and code. I did do coding while I was there, but it wasn't that much and it was different softwares, right? So you got to learn something new. And then the experience at GE, like I've been up tower, I've climbed wind turbines. Obviously, I did that with my internship. But the experience at GE was a lot more of the technician discussions in the background and what will make things easier for them as I design tooling that they're going to use every day. And from that perspective, everything that I do in my current role is what can I do to make the site technicians' lives easier, just in general? Everything that I could possibly do for them. Because at the end of the day, the technicians are the people that are our greatest assets as an owner operator of renewable energy power plants, if you will. And if we don't have experienced people, if we don't have knowledgeable people, then it's our job as engineers to help them get through any of the pitfalls that they need to overcome in order to be able to successfully continue to operate our fleet. So there's a lot of parallels, and my experience in general has been very focused on the up tower drivetrain components. That's been the most consistent throughout. So I've really honed in on, I want to know what's going on inside the nacelle, and that's kind of about it, right? Like I'm not focusing on towers or the civil side. I'm not really focusing on blades either, but that's a huge part of the industry. So, I kind of found my niche at Clemson, decided that the drivetrain stuff was really where I was interested, and then really tried to hone in on it. And the knowledge that I gain at every opportunity is helping me to make sound decisions in my current role. Hopefully that answers that question.
Yeah, that was a great answer. Thanks. It seems like, yeah, when you say like it's just that one component that you're focusing on, but when you open it up, there's actually so much that happens inside of like a nacelle. And we've definitely seen that in our building process. So what does that look like for you on your daily job? In your current role at RWE, what does that look like?
Yeah, just like my current day to day. Yeah, okay. So the things that I'm doing, so you guys at Collegiate Wind Competition are really unique in that you're kind of designing from the ground up, right? What I get to do is I get to say what exists and what are we doing with what exists. So kind of some of the examples I like to provide are, a technician might reach out to us any day of the week and say, hey, my check engine light's on and I can't figure out what the problem is, essentially. And so my job is in that instance, they tell me what they've tried, they tell me, what the fault code is, they tell me, if there's been any history on the turbine that I need to know about, and then I get to take a look at original equipment manufacturer, so OEM documentation, so things like from GE or Vestas for Siemens Gamesa. And I can take a look at schematics. I can take a look at whether that's electrical or hydraulic. I can take a look at maintenance documents. I could take a look at, prior conversations, historical documents, things like that, and try and figure out, is there anything the technician missed, first of all? And then if the technician hasn't really missed anything, try and sift through the data that we have to figure out, okay, what might actually our issue be, from a, let's call it a root cause perspective. And so the root cause analysis process really comes into play a lot in my role, where even if I'm not dealing with something that's failed, something that's faulted, I still need to understand, how did the fault start? What triggered the event? And then from the event perspective, like, why did it happen? And once I kind of answer a couple of those questions, I'm able to help determine, how do I actually solve that problem. So it's very much deep problem solving is most of my day to day. Conversely, though, we do something called self-performance at RWE. And what that means is, again, think about your car. If you bought a brand new car, you might go take your car back to the dealership for the oil changes, for the tire rotations, for the major issues that you might have for recalls, right? Things like that. If you bought a used car and maybe say the OEM or the Toyota of the world, they don't exist anymore for some reason, right? It's like so old that they don't operate anymore. You're probably going to take that to a third party mechanic. And the third party mechanic generally knows most things about cars, and they'll be able to help you figure out what is going on with your car, right? So I'm basically the third party mechanic side of the industry. That's what RWE is as a whole. So we typically try to service all the wind turbines ourselves without using technicians from GE or Vestas or Siemens Gamesa. And because of that, we have less access to information on certain tasks and maintenance plans and things like that. But from that perspective as well, we generally know our turbines, right? Like, they've been in operation for a really long time. So knowing all that background information, I help to put together maintenance plans. So I say, hey, every year you should go grease this bearing, or every 7 years you should go refill your oil, or, in 10 years, maybe you want to change out a sensor because it's hit its end of life, right? So I get to help with, how do we want to perform maintenance on our turbines? And that might vary based on what the original equipment manufacturer suggested for these turbines. And so again, it goes back to that data-driven decision, engineering judgment. How long do we feel we can wait before we want to grease something or put oil in something, or change out a part if it might not already be broken? Do we want to take the chance to wait for it to fail? Things like that. And then another big part of my job is diagnosing failures and then figuring out why they failed. So commonly, I'm sure you guys will experience this when you get to your testing phase. You might design something and it might not be over designed. It might be where you exactly think you need it to be, and then it fails in the middle of operation, whether it's a blade, whether it's a gear, whether it's a bearing, whether it's your tower, right? Whatever it might be. And so when those things fail, you kind of have to figure out from the get-go what happened that contributed to the event, why did it happen, and then how do you fix it is kind of the broad root cause analysis kind of scope. And so I help with the first part, kind of the diagnosis side, to say, hey, we have a gearbox and it looks like it's going to fail bearings in 6 months. We probably should replace it so that we don't have a turbine that has a bearing failure in the middle of operation, which could cause further catastrophic damage. Sometimes, though, the damage is present before I can see it so early that we can't actually catch it. So then we might actually have catastrophic bearing failure. And what does that mean? That means we have to stop the turbine and then we actually have to go replace it immediately. For things like gearboxes, it's pretty common that you can identify what some of the failure modes are. It might be material quality, it could be installation error, it could be debris in the oil, things like that. But for other things, you might have additional induced loads on the system. You might have, trying to think of some other good examples. You might have an event where one of your couplings has slipped, and half of your turbine accelerated and half of it stopped, right? And you're like, why did that happen? So you kind of have to look at the controls, you have to look at the design, you have to look at just what the events were that led up to that situation to help you figure out what actually happened from a failure perspective. So I'm using a lot more of my general turbine knowledge from previous jobs and then applying a lot more of like my engineering, like educational background in some of these cases. So things like bearing tolerances or gear ratios, or I might actually be using finite element analysis in some cases, things like that. So definitely like quite the variety from a day-to-day perspective, which is fun because I am the type of person that likes to have a lot of little things going on at once so that I can kind of jump from project to project, which is probably the part that I enjoy the most about this role, aside from just getting to work with the technicians and getting out to site. So hopefully that answered that one.
Yeah, it's also really cool, I think, to see that you do communicate very closely with technicians. I think like personally, just because being like a student still, it seems like, yeah, like manufacturers and technicians just like get a product operational and then it's like up and running and you don't. But yeah, it is really cool to see that there is kind of that back and forth between like maintenance and operators and the technicians on the ground actually. So
Yeah,
thank you.
definitely.
Yeah, just one more question before we open up for Q&A. You also mentioned that in 2017 you were awarded the Wind at Our Backs Fellowship with W Rise.
Mhm.
And since then, I know you've been really involved with W Rise and also SWE and different professional development organizations. So how do you think like maintaining those communities has supported you throughout your career now that you're kind of, not to say your career is like already developed, because I guess professional development doesn't ever really end, but now that you're like in a more permanent job, I guess.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So I guess so my involvement with things like Rise and SWE are currently more on the professional development side, whereas when I was in college, it was more what can I learn from these organizations from a webinar perspective, from a scholarship perspective. Like if you guys don't know, if you're in the middle of your college careers, like keep applying to scholarships from like entities like SWE and Rise, ASE, ASME, things like that. You can do that beyond just being a freshman. So remember that, because that was something that was kind of like not on my radar at all. So when I got the Rise Fellowship, that one was a little different because it was more of a go to the conference, learn all these things. And that was really valuable from a networking perspective for me. Similarly with SWE, I had never gone to a SWE national conference or even a local conference. Um, so either way, I started using those organizations as scholarship entities, as kind of early networking opportunities, as what can I learn on, specific topics, webinars, things like that. Now it's transitioned more into how can I get involved with mentorship for these organizations, for people like all of you. Um, how can I help to plan professional development opportunities that help educate people that are our members? Or how can I plan events to support local networking? Or how can I go to a national conference and learn how to be a better leader or how to be a better engineer or things like that. So it's consistent to some perspective where the networking is really valuable, but it's definitely transitioned more into how can I be a better leader long term, because ultimately that's something that I hope to do. But I've held like actual local chapter leadership roles in both Society of Women Engineers and Rise as a student and as a professional. So there's tons of opportunities. It's a great way to meet people, especially like if you move to a different state or a different city and there's one of those professional societies that exist. Maybe they only meet quarterly, maybe they meet monthly or weekly or whatever it is, ad hoc, things like that. That's the best way to meet new people. Even ASME, ASE, IEEE, NSBE, right? All of those things are the way to just meet people that are like-minded, that are similarly aged in some cases, right? You might be able to find a mentor there, you might be able to find a friend, right? So that's definitely, those have been great networks for me to just really hone in on my connections and meet new people, and then also promote things like, how to write a better resume, or maybe you're learning about public speaking skills, or you're learning about being a mentor, right? Things like that. So it's evolved, but it's been very consistent in my life for the last probably almost 10 years, to be honest. So yeah, would highly recommend all the professional societies. They definitely have something fantastic to offer everyone. So
Thanks. Yeah, it's also really inspiring just to see like I know you're a very strong advocate for like promoting women in STEM, so that's
mhm.
really nice to see. And yeah, now we just like to open it up for questions if anyone in the audience has questions. I guess you can do like a raise hand function or just drop a question in the chat and we can read them out. So,
I have a question actually, Jessica. Um, I know the wind industry has seen a tremendous amount of growth recently, and I was just curious, in your opinion, where do you see the future of wind in the United States as well as globally headed?
Yeah. So it's funny. I'll tell you guys a story, and you can kind of take this as a lesson in overcoming adversity to some perspective. So, I had a professor once when I was early in my educational career that said, "I don't know why you want to go into wind energy because all of the good winds are taken," is what they said specifically. And I didn't believe that. I didn't agree with that, and I just said, "I'm going to do what I want." Like I don't want to listen to that. And I mean, if I had listened to him, I wouldn't be in this industry, right? So I think there's something to be said about all of the old kind of paving the way wind sites have a lot of the good wind, right? Because there's only so much wind to go around. But I think what's really cool about the industry right now is despite the quote unquote good winds being taken, right? So if you think about class types of wind, right, there's like 4 or 5 different class types of wind. There's the high end and the low end. If you think about wind in general, the higher up you go, generally the better the winds are because they're smoother, clearer, right, stronger in some cases. So the industry in the last few years has really grown into how can we capitalize on quote unquote low wind areas where we actually just put turbines up higher so they can still capture the really good winds. They just happen to be a little taller than where we were operating in before. And so from that perspective, I think onshore wind specifically, we're going to see bigger turbines, taller turbines. And then in those cases, there's a lot of functionality questions around how do technicians climb, 700 feet wind turbines, right? Something crazy like that. Maybe we need actual elevators, better lifts. Trains might not be that tall? How do we have more innovative repairs? How do we have more innovative maintenance? Things like that. So I think there's a lot coming in the pipeline for the maintenance and repair scope for larger turbines on onshore wind. Um, Offshore, and I think that's globally. I think that's not just the US. I think we're seeing it a lot more in the US because we don't have turbines that are as tall as places in Europe or like the Asia Pacific, if you will. So I think they'll grow a lot more there as well. And then I think from an offshore wind perspective, that's been a little teetery on just kind of pricing for PPAs and just the financial risks of such big projects that we're trying to do offshore. But I truly believe that offshore is what is going to get us kind of the renewables capacities that are the targets and the goals long term. And what we're going to see there is a very similar scope of like, we don't want to have to take a crane all the way to sea to be able to do maintenance, to do specific repairs that are really costly because these turbines are large. So I think what we're going to see a lot is innovation in things like AI, right? Automated, like drones that can do maintenance in some cases, right? Like, how do we minimize the costs associated with people that have to go out to an offshore turbine to do maintenance and repairs, general inspections, things like that? Can we automate that with drones, robots? Is there a way to reduce, the size of components or maybe make components kind of modular where you could take like half of it out up tower and, be able to get that to a boat? Things like that, I think, are going to be where the innovation really comes in. I expect that to be more offshore. And then once it's kind of developed offshore, I think it can be kind of back applied to onshore when it becomes more of an issue with the larger, taller turbines.
Thank you so much.
Sure.
It looks like we have a few other questions too from Brian Fong. He's asking, what is something you did during your internship that allowed you to get your full-time offer?
Yeah, so I guess if you're thinking about trying to get the internship to be your full-time offer, so if like you want to stay with that internship company, I think within your first couple of weeks, and this is with any internship, whether it's before or after you graduate, then the first couple of weeks of your internship, maybe if it's a 10-week internship, maybe by like week 4 or 5, hopefully you've gotten a feel for what that company does, got a feel for what you might like to do. And then as you're talking with your manager or your internship leader, whoever it might be, maybe at like the midway point of your internship, you can express to them, hey, I would be looking for a long-term full-time job doing XYZ that I've already done here, etc. Do you think there will be opportunities this fall, next fall, 2 summers from now, whatever it might be? And having that open line of communication immediately will really help if you want to stay in the same company. For me, I got my full-time offer kind of in parallel with the actual internship happenings. And so it kind of really isn't a glamorous story. It's more just I kept applying to jobs. I did a few interviews. I actually did take time off to go visit the site that I would be working at in Charleston, South Carolina, so that I could get a feel for, is this the right opportunity? And ultimately, Clemson was able to pay for that as part of my interview process. So, they flew me there, they gave me a hotel for the night if I needed it, they toured me around the facility, we had lunch, and I left, kind of thing. So there's definitely things like that, having those conversations, asking to see facilities, continuing to apply, those are the things that are going to get you further if you want a full-time role like that. The other thing that you could do that I try and recommend from a jobs perspective is if there's anyone that you could be either connected to on LinkedIn, whether it's you personally, or if you want someone to make an introduction through somebody else, like if you wanted me to make an introduction somewhere else, I'd be happy to do that. I'll just put that out there for any of you guys that are working on collegiate wind competition, because I know what you guys are going through in order to be part of this. So I know that you have the skills and capabilities to be great in any of these wind opportunities that might come your way. So if I'm connected to somebody at a company that might be able to help you get the first conversation going, I'd be happy to make that introduction. Similarly with things like recruiters online, they might have some specific company contacts if they don't have a job open already. So you could kind of take the networking route, if you will, as well. If you see something that you're really excited about, you put in an application, you go find somebody to talk to, right? People like if you're bold and just kind of reach out cold on LinkedIn and are inquiring and really excited about something. So yeah, similar to that, like whatever you can do to just kind of network and then be open and honest about your expectations for just a long-term career. So that'd be my recommendation there.
I had a bit of a, hello, I'm Kiana. I had a bit of a follow-up question based off that. Could you
Sure.
talk a little bit about some of the particular skills that you think are useful for for not necessarily the internship you did, but just in general for wind energy?
Yeah, totally. So I think I think generally, I assume we're all mostly mechanicals, electricals, maybe some civils, and then there's maybe some non-engineers here. Is that fair? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So from an engineering perspective, which I can speak to best, um, the soft skills are in sometimes the most important. So things like being able to communicate well in writing and speaking are really helpful. That's just kind of a given, but if you can kind of project yourself well, people really appreciate that. So communication is obviously key. From a technical perspective, personally, I've never used calculus in my career, right? So like some of the nitty gritty technical isn't that specific to an industry career. If you're going into research, absolutely. So things that I've used personally have been like my machine design class has been really helpful. My classes that included software like finite element analysis or CAD, things like that are really going to be more practical and useful. And what I would recommend is like if you're a freshman, sophomore, junior, and you're like, I'm not really sure what I want to do, I'm not sure what might help from a technical perspective, I would look up jobs that you think you might be interested. Like I had a folder, a physical paper folder where I printed out job descriptions back, 10 years ago, and I was like, what do I want to do in this industry? And I had everything from like a resource assessment engineer that really focused more on the meteorology side to a hardcore engineer to a research engineer to a technician, right? And then I kind of could get a feel for what the buzzwords were for those jobs, and did I feel that I had the educational background to kind of know generally what I needed to have in order to be successful in a role like that. So there's something to be said kind of about just like the general technical awareness, as well, aside from just like some of the nitty gritties and in terms of classes. And then I would say similar for like project development and kind of the business side, find the jobs that you might be interested in, kind of focus on what those key words are. And I think that will really help just because I'm not in that realm. I don't want to say, yeah, go take the physics or something. So I would say, consult the industry, if you will, by taking a look at what the jobs are out there. And at the end of the day, like in your first job, you're not going to know everything. Like that, the expectation is that you definitely don't know everything. Like, you might know like 30% of the job right into, day one, but you need to be taking jobs that have kind of stretch goals and some challenges for you, so that you end up in a position that you actually enjoy. So I think hopefully that answers that question, but it's generally the soft skills are really important just as much as the technical are. And a lot of times it's going to depend on what type of job setting you end up in as to what skills you actually need.
Okay, thanks. It sounds like you were also saying earlier that not only like touring the facilities, but also like just looking at what the technicians were doing also helped a lot.
Absolutely. Yeah. Observation is huge. That's definitely some of my job as an engineer. Like engineers, a lot of times will say, oh, I'm coming in, I'm the subject matter expert, I know what I need to do, right? But sometimes taking the first few minutes and like maybe the first hour when you're on a job site and just kind of sitting back and not saying anything, observing what's happening, sometimes that's really valuable as well to just get a feel for, how everyone operates and interacts, and then you can kind of step in with some of your knowledge once you get there. So definitely.
Thank
Awesome.
you so much. We have another question in the chat.
Sure.
Ryan asks, how do you see the leaps between GE and RWE as their businesses are somewhat geared in energy?
Okay. I'm not quite sure what leaps means. I feel like Ryan just left. Oh no, maybe Ryan's in there. Hard to tell. There's a lot of names here. I guess you know, what I can speak to between the two companies is, so like GE is a manufacturer of turbines, and RWE is the owner operator of turbines. So their business models are quite different, right? GE wants to sell turbines. RWE, we're making money because we don't hire GE to service our turbines. That's kind of where the difference in the business is, in general. And also we're producing energy, so like that's a massive part of our income stream, right? But like those are kind of the differences between the two. Obviously, so like GE as a whole, right? If you think about all of GE, renewable energy is just one segment of the GE business. Similarly to RWE, we have RWE, kind of the parent company. We also do some traditional fossil fuel generation. We do hydrogen, we do I think we did transportation at one point, right? Like there's a lot of different like sub businesses. So a lot of times you'll see companies have parent companies that have, you know, multidisciplinary type of roles. And you could kind of move around in between the different types of avenues there. But I think generally, like GE is still very much committed to the clean energy revolution. RWE is here to propel that forward by buying products like GE or Vestas or Siemens Gamesa to help just, you know, hit those clean energy targets in general. So they're very, you know, they kind of work hand in hand, but in some cases, right, they're competitors based on the business side of it specifically. So hopefully that answered that one.
Yeah, that was great. Thank you. We have another question in chat. What are the biggest misconceptions about working in the industry? What do people need to know about going to work in the wind industry?
That's a really good question. I think my biggest misconception trying to get into this industry is I more or less doubted my abilities to be in the industry. And I think the reason that is because when I was in school anyway, renewables was not, you know, the next biggest thing yet. And now it really is. And so for me to say, I want to go into wind, there were kind of not a ton of opportunities for me right out the gate. But what I really think now is there's lots of little pop-up companies, little developers, you know, little operators and service providers and things like that, where people have really started a lot of small businesses out of the renewables industry, which I think is really exciting because there's things like MWBEs, there's things like, you know, technicians who decided that they didn't want to work for, you know, the big man anymore, and I want to go make my own company. So they went and made their own company and they just service wind turbines all day the way that they want to. So I think that's something that's really cool now, is that there's just so much variety of companies that you could choose from. There's, you know, things like startups, there's research, there's traditional owner operators in industry. You know, there's just so many places that you could go. You could be on the construction side, right? So I think probably the variety of what we have now was something that I didn't think we had before, I guess. And I think it's grown in the last few years given like the IRAs and things like that. So from that perspective, that would probably be where I'm at on misconceptions, specifically for working in the industry. Obviously, the industry has, you know, its concerns about, you know, bird and bat deaths and things about, you know, noise concerns and shadow flickers, right? Like kind of the, I don't want to call it political issues, but kind of that's where it's led. You know, there are things to be said about, you know, the noise levels, and there are definitely mortality rates for birds and bats, right? But there are also things that the industry is doing to prevent all of that from being, you know, a major factor in the operation of a wind plant. So that's definitely, you know, some of the actual industry, not just working in it, the industry has its own kind of quirks from that perspective. And that's something that we've been working on for the last 40 years. So it's definitely nothing new. And then I think the other half was, what do people need to know about coming into the industry? So I guess from my perspective, it's a lot easier to get into the industry, I feel right now. I think from a, you know, how do I find a wind job perspective, if you wanted a wind job right out of school, I think where the renewables industry is as a whole right now is solar is a lot hotter than wind, no pun intended. It's just a little bit more popular right now because there's more kind of tax credits, there's more just like local manufacturing happening, things like that. So I think the opportunities for wind specifically are not just wind specific anymore. It's more like you might be doing wind and you might also be doing solar, because a lot of the developers, the operators, things like that are going to be doing both. So maybe that's one thing to know, is like you might not get something in wind right away, or it might not be 100% wind right away either. But what I will say is things like collegiate wind competition are the exact place that you need to be, because you guys will go to the Clean Power Conference this year. I believe that's where the final is, right? You guys will get to do what I did as a wind fellow. Like, you're gonna walk around the trade show floor when you get a few minutes and go talk to professionals. And that's gonna be the type of networking and conversation that's gonna get you the job in the industry, in my opinion. And you can do that not going to a conference. You can do it on LinkedIn. You can send emails, right? You can have your interviews, things like that. You don't have to go there for that. But that's going to be where the most abundance of opportunities are going to be present, because that's just what that conference is meant for in a lot of cases. So it might be a little difficult to get right into wind, just because of the shift to solar. But in my team, we're looking at wind engineers, we're looking at solar engineers, we're looking at battery storage engineers. Like, those are like the top 3 people that we need to have in our team, as an entity, right? We have 9 people on the team. We have to have those specialties, because we're going to be starting to really, hone in on, let's say, the battery storage side of things. I think that's the industry upcoming as well. So hopefully that answered that one there.
Yeah, that was great. I recently heard that doing the community outreach with communities you're working to plan on putting wind turbines in is so important. So that's great.
Yeah.
Julie had a question in the chat. Do you want to ask?
Yep. Hello, this is Julie, and I had a question about you working as a technician on turbine. That sounds so great, and I also have no real background on engineering before I started majoring in it. So how did you prepare for that position? Did you do anything special for it? I know there are some courses that trains people for wind technician now, but did you had something like that before? So yeah.
Yeah, so when I was a wind turbine technician, I was lucky I knew the difference between a Phillips head and a flathead screwdriver, was kind of where I was at, right? Like, I didn't really know what the formal name for a crescent wrench was. I didn't really know what an impact wrench did. I barely knew if we had sockets in millimeters or inches, right? Like, there was a lot of disconnect. So it was really, I guess, intimidating from that perspective, because I came in and I was really willing to learn, but my hands-on experience prior to that was like relatively limited. And when I was in Peru, it was great. I got to use all these tools, but everything was in Spanish. And I was like, I don't know what any of this is called in English, right? So there was a disconnect from that perspective. But so I had to just be really, I take a step back and be really honest about where I was from an experience perspective, and say, I really want to do this. I'm very excited about this opportunity, but like, truthfully, I don't have a lot of hands-on experience, but this will give me the opportunity to have hands-on experience and be a better engineer later. And the team that I worked with really appreciated that sentiment, because they work on things that were designed by engineers that maybe never made it out to the field to see what they worked on, right? And so from that perspective, coming from a place of empathy was really well received for me and my team. And then knowing that I was going to be, this engineer later that might be able to help from a design perspective, when we went up tower, they'd be like, this is a terrible design. Can you fix this? And like, they might ask you questions on the fly and you'd be like, oh, I don't think I can right now, but maybe when I get to a company that I can do that in, I can help, So you kind of just have to be honest, maybe deflect where needed from that perspective, right? Like, that was just an okay deflection of like, yeah, maybe later. Like, I can't help now because it's already here, right? So things like that, I think were probably the most of the experience, was just really trying to be honest with everyone. I think I did do like, I don't know, I think I just like scoured a Lowe's website or something, or like walked into a Lowe's and was like, what is that called? What is that called? Maybe that, things like that, or just to kind of familiarize myself with tools so I didn't look, ridiculous when I was up there. But, the other thing though is like they might call a screwdriver a tweaker, and you're like, I don't know what that is, right? So you kind of just have to be honest about what you know and what you don't. Kind of get over that fear of not knowing in some cases and admitting that you don't know, because you're there to learn. Everyone has to learn sometime. I think the other thing you mentioned was specifically, did I do any like technician training? That answer was no. Like they just sent me up tower and said good luck for the most part, right? Like there was some safety training I had to do the first week so that I knew how to put on a harness and how to put a lock on an electrical circuit that was de-energized, right? Things like that to make me a little bit smarter on the job. But generally, you're escorted by other technicians who know the work that they're doing, who are there to really do the bulk of the work and bring you into it when they feel comfortable. So there were plenty of days that I was standing up there and just observing, and then there were plenty of days that I was in there wiring a cabinet or changing the grease or whatever. So I didn't go through any formal technician training. There are technician training programs, and it really depends what kind of background you have and what you feel you need. Because if you're going to go to be a wind turbine technician, having the certification and the training associated with that, like generally the benefit of the certificate programs is the connections you get out of the school. It's like the school might have an agreement with a technician, like a traveling technician company, I guess is probably the best way to say it. And then you might get a job immediately as a traveling technician with this company that partners with the school to like guarantee they have a pipeline of new hires, right? So that's some of the benefit of that. But like in my mind, you don't need any experience to be a technician as long as you're doing engineering in some capacity. Arguably, even if you're not doing engineering and you have kind of a technical background, like you work on cars on the side, but you're, a finance major, like you could go do a technician role, definitely, as long as you have a little bit of know-how, in my opinion. And like I said, I knew the difference between two screwdrivers, and that was pretty much it. So if I could do it, you could do it.
Thank you. I'm pretty much same boat. I just barely know the difference between. Yeah.
Absolutely.
That's awesome. Is there a different language they use in the field when talking about certain equipment versus what professionals know them as?
Definitely. Yeah. Yeah, there's like slang for almost everything in some cases, and it just depends like who you're working with, where in the US you are. Like I was in Illinois and they would call them tweakers, but then I went to Texas a few months ago and they're like, yeah, give me that screwdriver. So it just depends. The other thing too is like if you're in an area that the technicians themselves speak a physically different language, right? Like they might be speaking Spanish in southern Texas, right? Like I've come across that before, and they might be like, oh, it's whatever, and I'd be like, I don't know what that is, right? So like you just kind of have to ask, and then maybe they'll show you, or whatever it is, if there's a physical language barrier. But generally there's a lot of slang for things, and you kind of learn that as you go, and it just, or people say, oh, hand me that socket, but did you know it needed to be a hex head 55 millimeter, blah blah blah, like there's kind of like some assumptions as to what it might be, and you might pick the wrong tools. So definitely some questions there, and generally people are like, oh yeah, that's not actually what that's called, I've always called that my entire life. So it's kind of getting over some of those just usual humps, if you will, or the norms that people have, I guess. So yeah.
That's really good to know. I have a question. Um, what do you look most forward to in your career and personally in this year?
Ooh, this year. Okay. So one of my big goals for, I should say, maybe it's maybe like the next 2 to 3 years, is I want to get out to every single site that RWE operates. It's like 40 of them. I've been to like 5. But a lot of them are clustered in the same area, so I could probably hit like 5 in one day. But I really do want to go out and meet more of the technicians. I want to climb the different types of turbines, right? Like I've been up a GE, I've been up a Nordex, I've been up a Siemens Gamesa and a Clipper, but I haven't been up a Vestas V100 or a Siemens 2.3, right? Like whatever they are. Like I kind of want to just get the variety from a field perspective and just have more experience, more time with the technicians, more opportunity to see the differences and the nuances between the platforms. Because at the end of the day, a wind turbine's a wind turbine, but you might have a dual stage planetary gearbox and a single stage planetary gearbox. And what's the difference between those two? And how do they impact operations? Those are the types of questions I hope to answer. So that's a big goal for me. In the next year, I guess this is one thing we haven't touched on, which usually I mention at least. So I'm 4 out of 10 classes into a master's of science non-thesis currently. That's at the University of Alabama online, and I paused because I bought a house, I got a job, I moved, right? Like there were lots of life things that happened for me. So something I hope to do this year is to figure out, do I still want the degree? And if I do, what do I want to focus in? Because right now I'm doing the engineering, but the last class I took was like differential equations, high level accelerated calculus applied to engineering. It's like I don't need that day in and day out. So do I want to go for more of a quality management degree or an MBA, right? Things like that. Because a lot of times, like if you're not going to go into a master's right after school, which is totally up to you, my recommendation is I liked to get the industry experience and go back for the master's. But the problem with going back for the master's is you're probably doing it while you're working. And if you're lucky, a company will pay for the whole degree for you, which means you're going to be doing classes for like 3 years, most likely. So it's just really hard to fit that into your day to day, I guess, is where I'm going. As you could tell, because I'm only 4 of 10 classes and I took like a year off. But so part of the reason I did that degree program was when I was at GE, I needed the more technical degree path. Now I'm like, I really want to be a manager someday, or like an actual people leader manager someday. So from that perspective, maybe something like an MBA is a little bit more applicable because as a manager, you touch more than just the technical. You touch the finance side, you touch the people side. There's a little bit more, you have to be a little bit more well-rounded to do that. So my hope, at least here, is to figure out what I want to do with the master's. And if I want to even continue, right, I might just not be interested in it. But the benefit is that RWE could pay for like, I don't know, probably at least 3 or 4 classes somewhere within a year. And then I could be done in 2 years, right? So there's kind of the pros and cons there that I need to figure out. But yeah, I would say those are personally what I'm looking forward to. I think industry-wise, we're going to see a lot with offshore grow, especially with the couple of projects off the northeast coast that are going in currently and that are coming online. I think those are going to be really big as well. So I'm generally looking forward to that too. So yeah.
That's really awesome. I hope with whichever option you choose, continue your master's. I hope everything goes well. Thank
Thanks.
you.
Awesome.
So we have a little more time for any more questions if there are.
I was just wondering, Jessica, what excites you most about the wind industry, and what message can you share with undergraduate students considering a career in this field? Like, what would you say to your undergraduate self?
Yeah, totally. It's a great question. So I guess probably my biggest message is that there's a place for everyone in this industry, which is really unique because it's one of the kindest industries I've been in. And I haven't really been too far outside of the energy space. Like I did some internships in HVAC, kind of the energy efficiency realm. And like that was fine. But I feel like this industry is still so new, like it really is still developing. But everyone that's here is so excited to be here, so excited to offer advice, so excited to help other people. And like that to me is just like the biggest selling point of the industry. And that's part of the reason why I will do things like this, right? Like to get to see people like you compete in collegiate wind competition, that's just like a highlight of my career in some cases, right? Like you guys are just so smart. A lot of times you're smarter than I am, and I've been in this industry for a few years, right? Like you guys just know more about the overall ins and outs of a turbine. And to me, that is just really exciting to see what we do in this industry next because it's still very young. It's only, if you think about it, it's like maybe 40 years old if we want to consider the starts in the 80s, right? But really it was like the 90s and early 2000s that wind really took off. And, thinking that it was the early 2000s, it's only like 25 years, right? We've had cars for like over 100 years, right? Or something crazy. So from that perspective, like there's just so much more innovation to come. And then from a, let's say like diversity of the workforce from a, gender, racial, ethnic perspective, like people want to be here because it is such a kind industry. So that's really exciting. But from a, diversity in the same sense, but differently from a, types of engineers or types of people, like we truly need everybody in this industry. We need the people that can do the foundations, they can do the electrical, they can do the mechanical design. We need the people to help us find the money in the industry to be able to fund these projects. We need people that can go through the physics and the science, the meteorological science around where do we put wind energy. We need people to know about the oceans so that we can understand what structural components we need to be able to put wind turbines in the ocean. The atmospheric scientists, the business majors that can help with just marketing and the communications in the community to help build just a community effort around projects. Like that's some of the stuff that is just like really exciting to me because like I meet different people every day and they're often not engineers, which is just really cool to me. So I personally like the variety of people that are just here, the variety of thought, and then just the general kindness of the industry. I think it's a really supportive industry for people that are new to the industry, if that makes sense. And that includes early career people. So yeah, it's just overall, I feel like the industry is just really empowering to me.
Thanks so much, Jessica. That was a great response. I guess around now we should probably start winding things down, I think. We all really want to thank you so much for fielding all our questions and offering some sage advice for students interested in going into renewables, and specifically wind energy. We really appreciate it. And yeah, it was a very enlightening interview. So thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess the last thing I'll say is if anyone is looking for connections, for types of jobs that they might be able to look out, you can always find me on LinkedIn. Typically, I'll always message there. We can always set up an informal one-on-one type thing. I'm open to all of that. I generally, consistent with the industry, I like to see all the young people that are excited about being in this industry, and whatever I can do to help is kind of what I'm here for in some cases. So please reach out. You guys have my info, and yeah, good luck with collegiate wind competition. I'm so excited for you guys.
Thanks so
So
much. We'll be
much.
sure to forward your email out to any
Yeah,
students interested in getting in touch. So
absolutely.
thank you.
Yeah, by all means, you can send my email out for sure. And yeah, I'll see what I can do about reaching out directly. So thanks.
Great.
Yeah,
thank
thank you
you.
so much.
Awesome. All right. Well, have a good rest of your day, everyone. Thanks so much.
You too. Take
Really
care.
enjoy yourself. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.